there are far more protests that have been organized now than in 2017. The people who
Really?
count this stuff, political scientists who count
Because
protests,
it
have
feels
found
like
that,
there's less
um,
happening
yeah,
from
and
here at least.
coverage has been less so, perhaps because in 2017 we had this major women's march the day after the
Hmm.
inauguration,
Yeah.
and that sort of set the tone of the press coverage. And then the second thing that happened was on the Muslim ban, there were these
Hmm.
demonstrations at the airports that day, and it was these sort of spontaneous thing. But it turns out that in fact, um, the number of protests is much higher this time. Bernie Sanders and AOC um, have been doing a tour of rallies, and they've been getting crowds of 30,000 plus. The other thing that's happened is these town halls where Republicans show up. In the Republican who represents the state of Wyoming, which is like a 70-30 Republican state, and was just beat up by her
Hmm.
constituents.
Hello, and welcome to Eric McElroy's American Exchange with me, Eric McElroy. Welcome back if you're here for a subsequent visit, or welcome to the podcast if you've never been here before. This is where I dial back across the pond from London to find out what is happening in my home country. This week, we're joined by Jonathan Bernstein. He is the writer for Good Politics, Bad Politics on Substack, and he's a political scientist. He used to write for Bloomberg, and he's got an incredible eye for what's happening. I came across him with a Substack that he wrote where he says America is not in a constitutional crisis. It's worse. So we talk about that. We talk about some special elections coming up where there might be just a slimmer of some hope. And of course, we talk about everybody's favorite subject. You might have seen it messaged to you in your phone. Signal gate. Single gate? Single gate will be something else, but Signal Gate is the one we're going with now. So he was really great to talk to. I really enjoyed this conversation. Please make sure to check out his Substack and to enjoy Jonathan Bernstein. Oh, and if you're watching this on YouTube, this is the time to subscribe and like the video. Please share it as we're trying to grow our YouTube family. And I put up other clips as well, comedy things and little short bits here and there. So make sure you do that. And in the meantime, enjoy Jonathan Bernstein. Very excited to welcome a new guest to the podcast. Hello, Jonathan. It's great to have you here. Um, the point of this podcast is me finding out what is happening to my home country. And I like to start by, with all of my guests, to see how you think things are going. So, how's it going over there, Jonathan?
Well, things are not good right now in your home country. Um, you know, I think the little tidbit that I saw in the news this morning is that tourist travel, I guess all travel from Canada to the United States is down 70%. Tickets coming,
Jeez.
airline travel reservations this summer. And there's a reason for that, and there's several reasons for that. But people, the the current administration, the current president is trying to overthrow the republic, and that's not good.
You're saying that's not something to put on a sticker for the tourism board.
It doesn't seem to be. You'd think you get more reaction from Disney and some of the other people, some of the hotel chains or airlines, but at any rate, it's real and it's happening and it's scary.
Hmm.
Uh, and we've never now, the United States has a complicated history, and we have not been, a model democracy. Nobody's a model democracy. We've not been a perfect democracy, and we've had better and worse times. So, I hesitate to say we've, we've never seen this before, but we've never seen this particular thing before,
Yeah.
and it's disturbing, and it's sad and it's scary.
I mean, normally in the good old days, before all of this, I would have been like, yeah, Canada, who needs them? Fuck Canada. I've lived in the UK for 25 years and tried to actively avoid learning Celsius just so that when I say temperatures, I don't sound Canadian. But now I'm realizing that they might be the safe haven that was outlined in The Handmaid's Tale after all, with everything going on.
Yeah, look, we don't know what's going to happen, and one
Yeah.
of the key things for us right now is to not surrender our liberties, not surrender the republic just because the president wants us to.
Mm.
and we don't know how things are going to end up. There's a huge range of outcomes, and not only is it a huge range of sort of it's a multi-dimensional huge range of outcomes. So it may turn out that uh, some on some scales the United States becomes much less democratic, but on others it survives just fine, and we don't know yet. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, who thought we'd be having a war with so far only words and tariffs with Canada. Something that, as far as I can tell, the president of the United States is the only person out of 330 some millions who wants to have conflict with Canada. Now, one of the problems with the United States right now is that when the leader of the Republican Party wants something, all of a sudden 50 million Republicans also want that.
Yeah.
And but even at that point, we've seen some of the polling, and no, nobody wants that. Nobody wants Greenland to
Mm.
be, uh, no, nobody really wants a lot of the things that Trump is trying to get done. So, you know, this is one of the strange parts of our current situation is that um, not only are there sort of some conservative movement goals that are attempted to be achieved by going around the Constitution, but we also have on top of that whatever weird things that Trump has picked up from watching Fox News or where talking to his friends or whatever, wherever he comes up with these things.
Mm.
So yeah, it's an odd time.
Yeah. Um, I think, well, maybe Make America Great Again was g- going back because we never knew what period he wanted. Maybe it's 1812, the last time we were at war at Canada. Maybe that was what he was looking for. Um, the article where I really discovered your work and your Substack is brilliant, and we're gonna have it. We'll have it in the notes, of course. And I really like it. It's very accessible. It's interesting. Is it and it gave me some hope because when I started reading this article that you'd written, you said that America is not in what a lot of people have said a constitutional crisis, and I thought that was great. That's good news. And then I kept reading, and then you said it's a constitutional attack, and then I was like, oh shit. So, but. Uh, well, how have you differentiated those two things,
So
and what do you think that means if we're under attack?
well, yeah. So people use this language of constitutional crisis, and um, so the first problem with it is that you know now Britain, of course, famously has an unwritten constitution. The United States has a written
Yeah.
constitution. It turns out that a written constitution does not prevent all kinds of ambiguity. We have a very short, of the nations that have written constitutions, the United States one is very, very short, therefore relatively vague. And because of the way it sets up separated institutions sharing powers, courts, Congress, president, all sort of doing the same things in different ways. Um, you have constitutional conflict all the time. That's sort of normal.
Yeah.
And, um, people have over the years, over decades and centuries, oh, this might be a crisis because the Constitution doesn't really say what to do if the courts and the president disagree, if the Congress and the courts disagree. Um, to me, that kind of language is way too passive for what's happening right now. This is not a
Mm.
situation where there's a ambiguity in the Constitution. The president is pushing as hard as he can, and we've had every president does that. Every president tries to stretch the power of the office. Every Congress doesn't do that, but presidents do.
Yeah.
Courts do sometimes. Congress these days seems to be very uninterested in defending its turf. But this is not that. This is a president saying, "I am a law,
Mm.
and what I say goes." And that's not a constitutional crisis. That's an attack on the Constitution. It's the president saying, "No, the Constitution doesn't really apply to anything. I have a mandate. I want a huge landslide." Now, of course, he won a very narrow margin, one of the narrowest margins in the last 50 years in
Mm.
his election. But it doesn't matter. He could have won a huge landslide. He could have won as he did in 2016, minority of the popular vote. Um, you get to be president if you win, and
Yeah.
you get and that has certain rules to it. And he's saying, no, it doesn't. What I say goes. And, and so that's not, like I said, so to describe that as a crisis seems to sort of say, well, both sides have a point. This isn't that kind of situation. It's an attack on the Constitution. The
Hmm.
other problem with it, which I think in some ways can be interpreted hopefully, but also not, is that the idea of a constitutional crisis to me implies that there's this one moment in which we
Mm.
decide whether we're going to still have the Constitution or not.
Yeah.
Um, and so well, is this a constitutional crisis? Well, Chuck Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, minority leader, said the other day, well, if he defies the Supreme Court, well, that's something. But that's wrong.
Mm.
There is no one moment where the Constitution, we're not going to have a moment, almost certainly, in which Trump says the Constitution doesn't exist anymore. I'm the supreme ruler.
Yeah.
It's possible he'll say that.
He's said stuff almost like that before.
but but he also constantly says, and the people who support him constantly say, "Oh no, no,
Yeah.
no, we're the real uh, Democrat. We're the real small d Democrats. We are the real keepers of the Constitution."
Yeah.
Um, and everybody for 250 years has completely misunderstood the Constitution to say that, well, Congress has any right to anything,
Mm.
or the states have any rights to anything, or private universities have rights to anything. No, actually, the Constitution really does say that what the president says goes. So, and
Yeah.
what's going to happen is that's going to be fought out. It is being fought out. It has been fought out since January 20th when he took his oath of office, and it will continue most likely to be fought out throughout his presidency and perhaps after that. And sometimes he's going to win, and sometimes he's going to lose, and sometimes it's going to be a draw, or he's going to get some of his way and not others. And if we sit around waiting for, oh, is this the crisis moment? Is this when we're supposed to get upset? That's a way of avoiding the necessary fight, and that's
Mm.
how the president wins essentially, is by everybody saying, oh yeah, this is just normal politics, we're waiting for the crisis because that's when it really matters.
Yeah.
uh, Fortunately, I think that you've seen in the last 2 3 weeks especially, a lot of people who are behaving as if it's an attack on the Constitution. We've had protests and demonstrations, and we've had people showing up for town halls and yelling at their members of Congress. um, We've had big rallies from Bernie Sanders, and so there is some, and of course the courts throughout from day one, and lawyers and organizations who hire the lawyers have been fighting this in the court from day one,
Yeah.
and have been prepared to fight it in court. And so anyway, so it's a continuing story. It's not, oh, we don't have to pay attention yet because the crisis isn't here. The attack is here, and it's continuing. It's multi-pronged, and it ain't going to stop.
Mm. And I think because this is different. I think the examples I've seen Republicans say when they say, "Oh, well, Trump is he's pushing back against the courts the way Biden pushed back against the courts when the court said he couldn't do the student loan forgiveness plan that he wanted. Biden rejigged it and came back and tried again. But that's the point. He rejigged it and tried again. Even Trump last time when the Muslim ban was kicked back, he rejigged it and tried again. What's different this time is that he's not doing the rejigging. He's just continuing, like with the Venezuelan deportees, and his borders are saying we'll just do it anyway. That's
Yeah,
where I think you're right with the attack analogy.
yeah, exactly correct. Now, we have to be real careful. So far, Trump himself has not said, "Oh, I'm going to defy the courts." In
Yeah,
fact, he said the opposite. What they're doing, and you know, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a political scientist, so I
yeah,
know I can speak to some of this stuff, but there's some of it that's sort of technical. Um, it's normal for presidents, it's normal for parties in all kinds of lawsuits
yeah.
to fight back against the courts. It's normal for when governments get called on something for them to drag their feet in complying with a court order. Um, and it's real hard to, yes, Joe Biden did keep going back and pushing things. And he sometimes made claims that you could argue were beyond the pale.
Hmm.
But he was not, the context matters. And it matters that Trump is, it matters that there's dozens of these lawsuits because dozens of different times Trump has made claims in court that are preposterous. They're not pushing things a little too far, they're preposterous.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, he's, you know, on say the Venezuelan, the flights, um, they're sort of listening to the courts and sort of not. And you could, if this was the only thing going on, you could make an argument. Well, that's what presidents do. They push as hard as they
Hmm.
can. But it's not just that. It's across the board, starting with the Musk operation, the Elon Musk operation,
Yeah.
which is probably 100% illegal.
Yeah.
He has no authority to be telling people you're fired. He has
Yeah.
no authority to be telling people you have to write 5 points of what you did last week and submit it to me. Um, and and then and most importantly, I think of all the things. I mean, there's so many important things, but the idea of impounding federal funds
Hmm.
that the Congress um, authorizes money to be spent, says in a law, you have to spend. The United States is going to spend X amount of money on X program,
Yep.
and the president signs that into law, and has to, by constitutional history and by legislative enactment, the president has to spend that money. And Donald Trump and his Heritage Foundation staff says, no, we don't.
Hmm.
And this was fought out decades ago. Richard Nixon said the same thing. He said, no, we don't.
Yep.
And the court said, yes, you do.
Yeah.
And then after that, Congress went and passed a law saying, and if you don't want to spend the money that is by law you have to spend, here's a procedure for how you do it. And Trump has so far not used that procedure. He's just said, no, I don't, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
So again, it's possible that maybe he'll lose on impoundment, but win on some of these deportation issues, and they're all important. I don't want to.
Hmm.
So we're going to have this kind of situation, and yeah, it's nothing like Joe Biden expanding the trying to expand his authority on student loans, or George W. Bush, or some of the other presidents who all tried to expand their authority a little bit around the edges and where it's
Yeah.
ambiguous and all that. This is just nothing like that.
Do you think that, I mean, the pace of this is, I think, what caught everyone? Because I think a lot of us who were following it, and I would guess you agree with this, we knew that Project 2025 was going to be the plan because it was the plan. The guy that wrote it said, got caught on camera saying, we know it's the plan. Trump's going to deny it, but he's going to do it anyway. Like we all knew that was what was going on. And they're doing it.
Yeah.
But the pace that they're doing, I mean, do they not realize that it's a 4-year term? I mean, I know that, at some point he's allegedly a lame duck, unless you listen to Steve Bannon, he's going to run again, but let's not talk about that. But I mean, why the pace? Why is it so urgent to do all these things? Fire all these people at once. This week it's another 10,000 from the health services under RFK. There's the 80,000 VA. There's the Department of Education cut in half. Why all at once, do you think?
Well, I think that this has been the plan that talk about Project 2025. One of the things that this comes out of, it comes out of a lot of different strains of personally Trump, but also a lot of it is this strain from the Republican Party that's been fighting these things since the New Deal, since the
Yeah.
1930s. Um, and every once in a while they come close to winning in their view, and then get
Hmm.
frustrated. Now, this is how the American system works.
Yeah.
Our system is very different than most of the world because we have this separated institutions sharing powers. We get an election, and there is no manifesto that's then enacted. Boom,
Hmm.
done. And I realize it's not quite that simple in other nations, but it's
Yeah.
close to that simple. And here we have, it has to go through the House. It has to go through the Senate. The House and the Senate have to agree. Then the president has to sign it. Then it has to get implemented, and that tends to be very complicated because the bureaucracy in this country is weaker than in most similar democracies,
Mm.
and it has multiple. It reports to both Congress and to the president, not just
Yeah.
to prime minister of a unified executive. So, in 1980, Ronald Reagan gets elected with a plan, with rhetoric of yeah, we're going to get rid of the New Deal and the Great Society, and he spends about 6 months passing some pretty major legislation, and then reality kicks in, and
Mm.
there's a Democratic House, which was fairly conservative Democratic House, but then in
Mm.
1982, Democrats 2 years into Reagan, Democrats win in the midterms and go back to having a very liberal House of Representatives. And Reagan can't get any more legislation in his last 6 years of office, any more
Right.
conservative major changes. And then, that goes on. You have Newt Gingrich taking control of the House in 1994. And that lasts for about 6 months. And then it turns out, well, Bill Clinton is president, so you can't get everything
Yeah.
done. And you have a few years of unified Republican control in the 2000s, George W. Bush as president, and they don't that isn't conservative nirvana. And then in Trump's first term, they get very very little passed. They get a tax cut basically,
Yeah.
and they don't get the other things that they want. And so there's this whole idea that we keep getting frustrated. Something's getting us. We have to get
Mm.
at that. And so they have determined that now the truth is the reason that the arch conservative agenda keeps getting defeated is because very, very, very few Americans are on board for this.
Yeah.
Get rid of the health, get rid of the Department of Education. That polls at something like 20 to 80 against.
Yeah.
People think you should spend more money on education. Think you should spend more money on cancer research is one of the things that
Yeah.
they've gone after. Um, but if you are a what the conservatives believe is that in fact, because the polling is very complicated, so people will also say, if you ask people what should you spend on this program, that program, the other program, next program, 9 out of 10 programs they say spend more. Then
Mm.
you ask them, how much money should the federal government spend? Oh, less.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to believe that your side of those questions is the popular one. And
Yeah.
the truth is, liberals have the same frustrations.
Hmm.
They were very frustrated with Joe Biden. They were very frustrated with Barack Obama because Barack Obama only got the Affordable Care Act. He didn't get fully socialized medicine.
Yeah.
Turns out that in the United States, for better or for worse, that's not what people want. It's very
Yeah.
hard to get things through anyway, even if it was popular. So, you know, so there is this sort of sense that you know, people keep electing us. Never mind that we don't. People also keep electing liberal Democrats half the time.
Mm.
People keep electing us, and we don't get our program enacted. Let's be prepared to go after the people who are stopping us. And
Yeah.
a lot of that has the thinking has been, oh, it's the bureaucrats who are stopping us, and that's sort of the idea of let's fire all the bureaucrats, and then we'll suddenly get everything we want. So I think that's
Mm.
part of the reason that it's happened so fast is that they
Yeah.
think, and part of it is the American presidency. If you read the actual description of it in the Constitution, it's very vague.
Mm.
There's very few specifics. So what's happened is that it's built up over centuries, over two plus centuries, based on people have, what presidents have done. And so there's
Yeah.
this great example of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who got a ton of things done in his first 100 days. 100 days didn't exist before 1933 in Roosevelt.
Yeah.
He invented it, or people
Mm.
looking at him invented it, and so that's become sort of a standard, and everybody knows, just because everybody knows, not because it says it anywhere, that that's when you have to get things done. Um, so I think that that's part of it, is just trying to, if you're going to get things done, they have to be done quickly, which is not exactly true.
Yeah.
The Affordable Care Act for Obama happened 11 months in.
Yeah.
Tax reform for Reagan happened in his seventh year.
Hmm.
A lot of Clinton accomplishments during his second terms. So it's not really true that you have to get them all done in the first 100 days, but it is something that people think and
Yeah.
act accordingly.
It sets a narrative. Well, speaking of one of their successes that's happened in the first 100 days, because we're still, even though it feels like 1,000, we're still in the first 100 days, has been an incredible increase in the national security of the United States. And of course, I'm sarcastically speaking of the Signalgate controversy, which I'm assuming it's going to be called. What's incredible about this crisis is that the breakthrough, and I wonder if it's breaking through there in the States, because it's breaking through here in England. So the local cafe where I get my coffee before I walk my dog, it's a lovely couple that run it, Chrissy and Neville. And as I was getting my coffee a couple days ago, you could hear it on the background on the talk radio they had on that it was talking about this controversy. And then I made a joke about, sending them the battle plans for the invasion of Canada on WhatsApp. They got it. And then as I was leaving the cafe, one of the regulars who's also there, he's like, "Oh, so are we invading? I sent you a message." Like it's street level breakthrough. And I don't know if that's because everybody's on some sort of messenger app. Everybody's maybe posted in the wrong group, the young people these days, they're sending inappropriate pictures. I don't know. Is it breaking through in the States in the same way? Do you think it's going to have real legs of a colossal fuck up, and B, watching them try and wiggle their way out of it is just, it would be hilarious, but
Yeah, it's actually serious, right? I mean,
yeah,
this is, they could have easily sent this to somebody who was malevolent
yep,
and had called up the targets and said, guys. So yeah, it does definitely, we're 4 days into it, I think, as we tape this,
yep,
and it's certainly been, massive coverage. There were a few sort of freak accidents that helped that happen. It turned out that there's this regular uh, congressional hearing that happens every year
mm,
about what are the big national security issues that they
mm,
have the intelligence team to testify. That happened to be scheduled the day after this thing broke,
beautiful.
and that meant that the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who is very underqualified for the job and was not prepared to speak, isn't prepared to do the job. And the director of the CIA, who's slightly better,
Mm,
testified on Tuesday, and Gabbard did a terrible job, and she told a bunch of lies that were not sustainable.
yeah,
And Radcliffe was a little more, the director of the CIA was a little better at it, but so that sort of became a difference, a major story. That was in the Senate, and then they were
mm,
scheduled to testify in the House on Wednesday. So just by coincidence, normally they would just shut the doors and say, we're not talking to the press, or at least they would trot out one person to give a message. But this, they
yep,
were stuck with these people going up on Capitol Hill and answering questions, which I noticed that all of the cable news networks took live. Um,
mm,
and that's one of the things that signals to people. I mean, nobody watches cable, the audiences
yeah,
are tiny, but that's the kind of thing that signals something big is happening.
mm,
Um, and so, and that drove the cover, that to some extent drove the coverage back to local newspapers and local talk radio. Um, so that happened. The other thing about this is that the, and two things. One is that Donald Trump has sort of systematically gotten rid of all the professionals,
yeah,
which is one of the reasons this thing happened. Um, and he substituted in. He really he watches a lot of cable news on TV, which is
yep,
very odd. Um, and gets most of his information there, but he also gets most of his staff now from Fox News.
mm,
A lot of his, including his Secretary of Defense, who's wildly
yeah,
unqualified for the job,
yep.
but had a show on Fox News, not even a big show. Like he was the weekend host of
He
one
was
show or
the
something.
weekend morning guy. I mean, Jesus Christ.
And so,
Uh,
but and the other thing is that so Trump has sort of the cut of his jib test of who should get jobs,
yeah.
and it's how they look and how they look on TV. Which is crazy. Um, but the other thing that he cares a lot about is people who flatter him. And
Hmm.
he's been now in the public eye, especially in the political public eye, for 10 years. And so people who want to take advantage of that have had 10 years of examples of what works and what doesn't. And so
Hmm.
that's become sort of refined and evolved over the years. And so he's selected for that because he doesn't change. He doesn't learn from his mistakes at all.
Yeah.
Um, so there's all these people who have no clue what they're doing, which we saw, in the substance of what was in the chat. These were not
Hmm.
serious people talking about a serious national security decision. Forget that it's on an insecure channel, and forget that they
Yeah.
accidentally asked the journalist in. But if you look at how they're talking about this, they're not talking about it the way that, you know, Colin Powell or Dick Cheney was a terrible Secretary of Defense the second time around, but he would have talked seriously about things, or
Yeah.
go through whoever the people who've had these jobs are since forever. Um, you know,
Well, and then bitching about
this isn't.
Europe paying for it, and the fact, well, is this going to help? Is it complaining that it might help our allies, rather than looking at this is helping a global shipping issue that affects everyone? And whether you agree with the political situation and alignment of the Houthis or not, it's nothing. I mean, it's just the way they're talking about this is just, well, like you said in one of your articles, that they're winging it. They barely seem to know what the president wanted either until Stephen Miller chirped in and went,
Right.
"No, this is what I heard the president say," and they all went, "Okay." Versus, so did the president actually give this order?
Yeah, this is supposed to happen in the Situation Room
Yeah,
with serious people being briefed, having their aides behind them. All one of the things that I've been asking mostly over Blue Sky,
yeah,
is there a national security process in this administration resembling a normal national security process? And now we know the answer. No.
no, yeah,
Um, there's Stephen Miller pops in and says, "Yeah, that's what the president wants." Well, he's not a foreign policy expert. He's not a foreign policy. That's not his jurisdiction at all. His
yeah.
jurisdiction is beating up on foreigners who are in the United States. So,
And he's
um,
good at it. He's good at that.
um, but
Ugh.
yeah, and so, but the other thing that happens here is the thing happens, and then on the communication side, the same people who were on Fox News who look good and they're good at flattering the president are the ones who are in charge of developing you know, how to talk about this, how to spin this.
Yeah,
And they're terrible at it. They don't know
yeah,
what they're doing. They send out the press secretary with talking points that don't make any sense, that are going to be contradicted immediately. They went out and sort of dared um, the journalist involved to release the rest of the verbatim text, which he had withdrawn, because,
yeah,
for national security reasons. And they said, well, we didn't say anything about which weapons were going to be used. And of course, he said, did say which weapons were going to be used. And he had to know at that point that Jeffrey Goldberg had
yeah,
tweets on it. And, unbelievable that you would send him out to say something like that. But the truth is that they have survived by talking to their strongest supporters. And that's either all they know how to do or all they
mm,
even imagine would be important to do.
yeah,
And again, it's very easy when you win elections to think, oh, everybody loves us. And when you win
mm,
elections and you are told by the candidate, we won in a huge landslide, and you know that if you dare to say anything to the contrary, you're going to lose your job. Is
yeah,
that you would get fired for? If Pete Hegseth went out and said, "Well, we only won a very narrow margin," he'd be gone tomorrow. Everybody knows he'd be gone tomorrow. So,
yeah,
you know, the idea of talking to the American people generally, not just your opponents. Obviously, Democrats are going to dislike Trump, any Republican president, but
yeah,
they don't have any clue about how to talk, and they have no interest in talking to
Yeah.
the broad American public. They have an interest in talking to the hardcore people who watch 30 hours of Fox News a week and who listen to the talk radio and all that, and are going to believe whatever they say. So it's not even difficult to talk to those people. You just have to learn some catchwords and buzzwords. Um, but you know, the presidency doesn't work like that, and it's no
Yeah.
surprise that it's already unpopular. He's getting more unpopular. We'll see how what his floor is. He was unpopular through his first term, but not massively unpopular.
Mm.
If that's
Which is, yeah. And maybe, maybe if COVID hadn't happened, maybe, I guess in some ways, if he had, I think I asked someone else this, if he had stayed in for a second term, he would have kind of bumbled along the same way he was in his first term. And it actually wouldn't be, it's actually worse now because he's had this time away because they could organize themselves. I'm conscious of time, so I know you do a lot of thinking about, what is happening and, the attack that we're under and all of these kinds of things. I guess the final thing to kind of maybe if you have some thoughts on the way forward. So it seems like there's two, the Democrats in particular are debating between sort of the James Carville approach, which is to, let them keep digging the hole that they're in, and then they'll fuck up enough that eventually they fall into the hole. Or do we fight? My instinct is that you kind of need to do a little stay out of the way like during Signalgate, but then when they like have the chance for these congressional hearings, just pound the crap out of them. I feel like not fighting at all is not the answer right now. I, so what
well,
without yeah. So what is your instinct?
well, I think what is happening is exactly what is happening. Um, I mean, the short answer, fight. Longer answer, there's a lot of that happening.
Yeah.
There's, it turns out that there are far more protests that have been organized now than in 2017. The people who
Really?
count this stuff, political scientists who count
Ah, because
protests,
it
have
feels
found
like
that,
there's less
um,
happening
yeah.
from
And
here at least.
I think that the coverage has been less so, perhaps because, in 2017, we had this major women's march the day after the
Mm,
inauguration.
yeah.
And that sort of set the tone of the press coverage. And then the second thing that happened was on the Muslim ban, there were these
Hmm.
demonstrations at the airports that day, and it was a sort of spontaneous thing. But it turns out that in fact, um, the number of protests is much higher this time.
Hmm.
There's also, uh, I referred to, we had this tour of Bernie Sanders and AOC um, have been doing a tour of rallies, and they've been getting crowds of 30,000 plus. I think they've done three of them or so
Yeah.
far. Um, the other thing that's happened is these town halls where Republicans show up. In the Republican who represents the state of Wyoming, which is like a 70-30 Republican state, and was just beat up by her
Mm.
constituents over cuts to veterans programs, cuts to agricultural programs. Um, so there's a lot of stuff that's happening organically, but it's also being organized by people. The lawsuits that are happening, which are absolutely essential and are definitely happening, were organized before Trump even swore into office by people who read Project 2025 and said, "Oh yeah,
Mm.
this is illegal, this is illegal, this is illegal. Here's we need to find somebody who has standing to bring a lawsuit. Let's be ready for that. We need to figure out which jurisdiction, what point of law to and so that's happened in a very organized way. Whereas some things like campus protests and the town halls were originally not, organized from the top.
Mm.
Um, and what we saw this week in a special election, what the Brits would call a by-election, which is a much better name for it. In the Pennsylvania legislature, there was the Pennsylvania House and a Pennsylvania Senate seat up. The Democrats defended the one of them. It was a Democratic seat that they won by 30 points instead of the 15 that they usually do in that district. But in the Senate seat, in a seat that apparently has never, the last time it went for the Democrats was before the Civil War,
Wow.
and Republicans captured the seat by 15 points the last time, or I guess Trump carried it by 15 points, and a Democrat won by 1 percentage point.
Mm.
So that's, we have coming up on Tuesday, two special elections in Florida to fill
Mhm.
U.S. House seats that were vacated by, among other people, the National Security Advisor, who's in all kinds of trouble this week. And we also have a Wisconsin um, judicial election, the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, which is an elected office,
Yeah.
um, which is a bad idea, but anyway, it is.
Yeah.
And um, and millions of dollars have been poured into these three contests, and we'll see what happens. But one of so there's no just one answer, because partially and part of the whole story here is how large and complicated American politics is.
Yeah.
So that you have things like, the Pennsylvania legislature, and you have, elections constantly. So you can
Mhm.
sort of test and see how things are going, or at least people get the impression of it. And people
Yeah.
misinterpret them and they overhype them, but it still matters that once they hype them, people pay attention. So,
Yeah.
the answer is you do all kinds of fighting. Most people look to Democrats in Congress for leadership, and it turns out that's sort of misplaced, because Democrats right now are in the minority in both chambers and can't really do much.
Yeah.
It's not quite like House of Commons, where if you're a minority party, you really can't do much of anything. But it's still in the House, certainly, and to a large extent in the Senate, you can't do very much. And they're sort of doing what they can, but that's not where the leadership can come from. But states matter, counties matter, cities matter, and
Yeah.
we're seeing in some cases governors and mayors and county executives who are doing quite a lot. State attorney generals are behind a lot of these lawsuits,
Mm.
in Democratic states. Where you have
Yeah.
Democratic state attorney generals that are, so there is a lot of fighting going on.
Mm.
And sometimes you do let them screw up, but in most cases, because you don't really have that much of a choice.
Yeah.
They want to do, at least in the immediate sense. So there's my
Mm.
answer to that.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think it's, if people are looking for something to do, there's plenty to do. And it's going to be those state levels. It's going to be, doing, well, obviously in a nonviolent way, standing outside your Tesla local dealership,
I didn't even mention
all of
that.
those
Yeah,
kind of, yeah,
which
all of those things, that you can do. Um, and I think, I've heard them, I think it's pretty transparent that they want this. They're hoping for a violent riot somewhere so that Trump can go even further. So I think the things that have happened so far, maybe keeping these protests simmering like they have been, and doing it this way, that's going to chip away, and what will hopefully those chips will be what we can do to hold on to our democracy. Because I want to keep coming to America because it's making me nervous. But thank you so much, Jonathan, for coming on. I'll make sure people can find your Substack. It's a brilliant read, and it's been great having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So there we go. That was Jonathan. Thank you so much to him for coming on. Really enjoyed this conversation. I mean, I think this is an attack on our Constitution, and I think he just hit it exactly on the head in his Substack. That's why I wanted to have him on. His Substack comes out a couple times a week. It's a brilliant read to follow what's happening in the U.S. It's very straightforward, very clear, and just a great read. So make sure to check that out. I like ending with a hopeful message that the special elections that are coming up, some of which will be the week that this podcast is released, are going to hopefully show that there's a momentum shift towards Democrats and democracy. So that'll be interesting to see, as well as just whatever else has happened and been revealed in the messages from Signalgate. So a great conversation. I really appreciate Jonathan coming on. Thank you so much to Mark for putting everything together, as always, the producer. Thanks to Jonathan. Make sure to check out his Substack, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.